I saw the photos before she even told me she'd landed. There they were, 37 of them, perfectly filtered and cropped, glowing under the golden skies of Santorini. Smiles that stretched across oceans. Outfits we picked together, restaurants I had bookmarked for her. She didn't tag me in a single one. Not a mention. Not even a passing thanks to the one who made this possible. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Not jealousy, not envy, just silence. A quiet recognition that I had funded a dream I wasn't allowed to exist in. It hit harder than I expected. I had given her my year-end bonus. Every last cent told her, go, you need this, I'll be fine. And I meant it. I genuinely wanted her to have the trip she always talked about. To take the break she kept postponing. I imagined. The joy on her face, the deep breath she'd finally take. What I didn't imagine was being erased, being scrolled past like I was never part of the story. I zoomed in on one photo, her sitting on a rooftop with wine in hand, captioned, manifesting everything I deserve. The irony nearly knocked the breath out of me. I deserved something too, didn't I? A message, a nod, a photo with a caption that said, thank you for believing in me. But instead, I got nothing. Not even a reply to my last text, sent 2 days ago. How's the food? Did you find that cafe we talked about? Left on red? I locked my phone, set it down gently, and for a long moment I just sat there, still stunned and sinking into the quiet truth. Sometimes the people we lift the highest are the first to forget who steadied them. I kept trying to justify it in my head. Maybe she just forgot. Maybe she meant to tag me but got caught up in the moment. Maybe she didn't want to make it obvious that someone else paid for it all. But the excuses unraveled quickly. She had time to credit the Airbnb host, the boutique that sold her sandals, even the stranger who took her sunset photo. Everyone got a mention, except me. I wasn't just left out of the pictures. I was deleted from the narrative, and the more I stared, the more I remembered how much I had poured into this trip. I helped her pick the dates, researched flights, wrote out an itinerary by hand and slipped it into her bag before she left, folded between layers of encouragement. And care, she cried when I gave her the money. Said I was the kind of friend people don't deserve. And maybe that was the first red flag when someone thanks you, like they already know they'll never repay you. I wasn't expecting money back. I wasn't even expecting souvenirs. I just thought I'd matter, that I'd be part of the story she told when people asked how the trip came to be. Instead, I was the ghost beneath the glitter, the invisible wallet behind every view. I thought about posting a comment, something light. Glad you're enjoying it, but the smile felt like a betrayal. Why should I shrink what I feel just to protect the comfort of someone who clearly isn't thinking of me? I didn't post. I didn't text. I sat in that space where kindness meets consequence. And for the first time, I felt what I never wanted to admit. Maybe I wasn't generous. Maybe I was afraid to not be needed. The next morning, I woke up hoping for some kind of message. A photo sent just to me. A voice note, even as simple. I was thinking about you today. But there was nothing. Just more posts. More smiles. More sunsets. I watched as people flooded her comments with hearts and praise. So happy for you. Living your best life. You deserve this, queen. And all I could think was, do they know who made it possible? Not that I needed public recognition, but when you give someone your bonus check, you think they'll carry you with them, even if only in spirit. Instead, I watched her live her dream like I was never in the frame. I opened the drawer where I kept the envelope from work, the one that had held the bonus I handed to her, with no hesitation. I had told myself I didn't need anything that year. That joy shared was joy doubled. But the only thing doubled now was the echo of my own voice, wondering if she ever really saw me, or if I was just the convenient bridge she needed to get. There, I traced my finger over the edge of the empty envelope. It felt like a symbol now not of money, but of how easily I emptied myself for people who only know how to receive. I stood by the window watching the street wake up and whispered something that surprised me. You gave her your bonus? And she spent it like you were never real. And just like that, the spell broke. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just quiet clarity. She was on a mountaintop in Greece, but I was the one finally seeing the truth from a higher place. I spent the afternoon cleaning my apartment like I was trying to scrub the feeling off my skin. The guilt, the sting, the shame that wasn't mine, but had somehow settled into every corner. I folded laundry with more force than necessary, rearranged. The fridge wiped the counters twice, and still I couldn't shake the question echoing in my head. Why did I give her everything so easily? I sat on the edge of my bed, suddenly exhausted. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from waking up to yourself after too long in the background. I looked around the room and noticed all the little signs of how I've lived. Candles half burned, books lent out, and never returned. Gifts with no tags because I never wanted credit. I've always been like this, quietly generous, loud in my loyalty, soft in my boundaries. I don't even know when I learned to equate love with sacrifice. Maybe it was watching my mother make dinner for a family that rarely said thank you. Maybe it was learning that being easy to love meant asking for less. But somewhere along the way, I became fluent in giving without being seen. And now, this silence was just the clearest mirror yet. I pulled out a notebook from my nightstand and started a list, not of regrets, but of revelations. The first line I wrote, "Giving doesn't always mean belonging." I stared at it, letting the truth settle. I wasn't angry at her for enjoying her trip. I was angry at myself for thinking my place in her joy was guaranteed, simply because I helped fund it. That's not generosity. That's self-erasure dressed as kindness. And I wasn't going to play that role anymore. I scrolled back through our messages, not the recent silence, but the beginning. Photos we sent each other of shoes we couldn't afford. Screenshots of plane tickets each time she'd text. Someday, she used to call me her anchor, her safe place, the one person who always showed up. And I wore that like a badge, not realizing it was also a leash. For every favor I offered, there was an invisible promise attached: don't leave me behind. I didn't say it aloud, but it lived in every gesture. Every "I got you." Every night I stayed up with her through heartbreaks, cancellations, panic spirals. I was so busy being the solid one that I never noticed how rarely she asked how I was doing. How easily my own struggles were met with, "You'll be fine. You always are." And maybe that's the root of it. When people decide you're strong, they stop checking if you're also tired. I looked back at the day I gave her the bonus. She cried. Yes, she hugged me tight. But I realized, no, she never said, "Are you sure?" She never said, "What about you?" I had offered and she had taken, because that was the rhythm we knew. I give, she receives. I reassure, she thrives. And I vanish in the glow of her happiness like a match that's already served its purpose. I stood in front of the mirror that evening and looked at myself, not to criticize, but to see. Really see. I whispered, "You keep pouring from a cup that no one remembers to refill," and I meant it. Not as a punishment, but as a promise. Because the version of me that gives everything just to feel chosen, she's not coming on the next trip. That night, I made dinner for myself. Freely made it. Not something thrown together out of convenience or exhaustion, but a meal with intention. Fresh ingredients, a recipe I'd saved months ago but never tried because it felt like too much effort just for me. But I wasn't just me anymore. I was the person who had kept others standing, and now, finally, I would do the same for myself. As the food simmered, the apartment filled with warmth, not the warmth of being needed, but of being cared for. By me, I set the table with a single plate and lit a candle. A quiet ritual, not for presentation, but for presence. I ate slowly, letting each bite remind me, you're allowed to be the one who receives. Not because someone gave you permission, because you exist. Afterward, I sat on the couch with a blanket and opened a book I'd bought 6 months ago but never touched, too busy helping someone else. Right there, chapter. The pages felt heavier in my hands, not because of content, but because I was finally reading them for no one but me. And in that quiet, I realized, I used to think the ultimate proof of love was giving up something big for someone else. But now I see sometimes, the truest love is refusing to disappear for anyone. I looked around my apartment. It wasn't filled with souvenirs or postcards from beautiful places, but it was peaceful and real and mine. I whispered aloud, no more giving from my bones just to be remembered. The words didn't echo, they settled. Like truth does when it's finally said for you, not through you. And in that moment, the absence of her wasn't loneliness. It was freedom wearing new clothes. The next morning, I deleted the folder on my phone, labeled her trip. It had screenshots of restaurants, city guides, tips from travel blogs I spent hours compiling. I'd made it for her months ago, before the bonus, before the sign. When helping her plan the getaway felt like helping myself escape too. But that folder wasn't a gift anymore, it was weight. So I held my breath, pressed delete, and watched it vanish. I expected sadness, regret, something. But what I felt was relief, like reclaiming space I didn't realize I had surrendered. That act small, invisible to anyone else, was the first time I chose myself without apology. I looked around my home with new eyes. The corners that needed dusting, the stack of mail I hadn't opened, the shelf of books I kept meaning to read after I helped her get settled. I grabbed a notebook and wrote at the top of a fresh page, what have I postponed for people who forgot to wait for me? The list came easily: doctor appointments, writing projects. A trip I told myself I'd take when someone came with me. I paused, pen in hand, and circled that last one. Why was I always waiting for companionship to validate desire? Why couldn't I book a ticket, pack a bag, and go, not as a statement, but as a return to myself? I opened a browser, searched for quiet places, small towns with bookstores and lakes. Nothing viral, nothing curated, just somewhere I could exist without needing to be useful. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't fantasize about telling anyone. I just imagined going alone, fully present, fully me. And in that imagined silence, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt whole. That weekend, I took myself on a small trip not far. Just a quiet town 2 hours away with a used bookstore and a bakery that opened early. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I just packed a bag, filled a thermos with coffee, and left before the city woke up. The road was still and open, and I kept the radio low, letting the silence between songs fill the car. Like something sacred. I wasn't running away. I was returning to somewhere I'd never actually been, my own company. When I arrived, the air smelled like wood and earth, the kind of air you forget to miss until you breathe it again. I checked into a tiny inn and was greeted by an older woman who handed me a real quinot, a cardand, said, "This one's all yours." And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. That night, I took myself to dinner. Not takeout. Not a corner booth with my phone as a shield. A real table, a glass of wine, a main course I didn't justify. I watched the people around me laugh, eat, exist, and I didn't feel alone. I felt like someone who had been waiting too long for permission to enjoy something she paid for in full. Back in my room, I wrote in my journal, "She traveled without me. Now I travel back to myself." And the words didn't ache. They released. I fell asleep to the sound of wind through trees instead of typing bubbles that never became texts. And for the first time, I didn't dream of being seen. I dreamed of arriving somewhere I didn't need to be invited. I was already home in my own skin. The morning I checked out, I stopped by the bakery one last time. The woman behind the counter smiled like she'd been waiting just for me. "Back for more?" she asked, handing me the same pastry I ordered the day before. I nodded, and for some reason, I nearly cried. Not because of the food, but because of the way she remembered. In a place where I was no one, I was seen. I sat on a bench outside, the sun warming the wood beneath me, and let the quiet settle. I thought about how much I'd spent trying to be unforgettable to people who couldn't even remember to tag me in a photo. I had confused proximity with connection. I had poured love into someone who didn't know how to hold it. And now, for the first time, I wasn't trying to make her remember me. I was learning to remember myself. I opened my phone not to check her profile, but to delete the shortcut to it. It wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge, it was release. I didn't need to scroll through pictures that reminded me I was erased. I was building new ones now, quiet, ones just for me. I snapped a photo of the pastry and the empty bench beside me, not to post, but to keep a reminder that this moment was mine, that I could feel full without someone else framing the memory. On the drive home, I took the longer route, rolled the windows down, let the wind tangle my hair, and whispered softly, "She left me out of the story. That doesn't mean I don't have one." And in that truth, I smiled, not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because it no longer defined me. Back home, things looked the same, but I had changed. My apartment hadn't moved. My job was still there. The laundry pile had grown, and so had the emails. But when I stepped through the door, it didn't feel like returning to a life I had paused. It felt like stepping into a life I now chose. I placed the small keepsake I brought back, a smooth stone from the trail I walked alone, the windowsill. Beside the candle I used to light for her travels, I realized I hadn't thought of her name once during the whole trip, not in bitterness, not in longing, just silence. And in that silence, I found clarity. She hadn't texted, "No, how was your weekend?" "No, let's catch up." And I hadn't waited for it. That was new. I made tea and sat by the window, letting the afternoon sun brush the edge of the carpet. I opened my notebook and flipped back to my list. What have I postponed for people who forgot to wait for me? I added a new line, my own piece. And underneath it I wrote, "Reclaimed," because that's what this felt like. Not revenge, not detachment, but return. Every time I didn't reach out, every time I chose to spend my energy on something nourishing, I was reclaiming space, the kind she used to fill with emergencies and plans and stories that always needed a witness. I wasn't angry she had gone without me. I was grateful I had stopped begging to be brought along. I didn't need her to come back with souvenirs or apologies. I had brought back something far more valuable. The realization that giving everything doesn't mean you'll be remembered. But giving to yourself faithfully, consistently means you'll never be forgotten again. That week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a boundary and kept it. When a mutual friend messaged asking, "Did you see her photos? Looks like a dream," I simply replied, "I'm happy she got to go," and left it at that. No extra commentary, no digging for sympathy. Just a sentence that let the door close quietly. I didn't need to retell the story. I was done performing the hurt for other people's curiosity. I had already lived, Eitan survived it. I muted her profile, not out of spite, but out of self. I didn't need to be reminded of the party I was never invited to. That's what those pictures were now. A celebration I paid for, but was never welcome in. I deserved better. And that realization didn't arrive with rage. It came with stillness, with deep, undeniable knowing. I started lighting candles in the evening again, this time not as a vigil for someone else's adventure, but as a ritual. For my own return, I cooked meals slowly, with music that didn't ask for company. I bought myself flowers on a random Wednesday, bright ones, loud ones, the kind she used to say were a bit too much, but always caught her eye. I placed them in the center of my table like a declaration. I am worth the color. I didn't rush to replace the space she left. I didn't audition new friends. I let the quiet stay, and in it, I heard myself more clearly than I had in years. Every time I didn't flinch at her silence, I reclaimed a version of myself that had been waiting patiently in the wings, not to be seen, but to see, and she was beautiful. And finally, she was mine. Later that night, I opened the drawer where I'd tucked away the receipt from the bonus deposit. I had kept it without realizing why, maybe as proof that I had, in fact, given something real, something heavy. I held it between my fingers, tracing the faded ink, remembering the moment I handed that money over. Not with hesitation, not with condition, but with belief. And that belief hadn't been in hurt, had been in the idea that giving meant I was safe. That generosity would bind me to something lasting. I folded the receipt and slipped it into the back of a book between two blank pages, not to forget, but to seal it. To remind myself that even our most unreciprocated acts deserve to be acknowledged and then released. I lit a match and watched it burn in the tray beside me, not the receipt, but the idea that I ever had to give everything to be loved. The flame danced low, warm, honest. I whispered, "You can let go and still be good," and I meant it. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the quiet street. No new messages, no overdue apologies. Just the world moving exactly as it should. I wasn't waiting for a knock. I wasn't waiting at all. I was living fully. Without the tag, without the thank you, without the follow-up. I had become the credit, the acknowledgement, the presence. And somewhere deep in the marrow of that silence, I understood. Being forgotten by someone doesn't mean you disappeared. Sometimes it just means you were meant to outgrow the version of yourself who kept shrinking for a place in someone else's highlight reel. And now, I was done being cropped out. The next time someone asked me what I did with my bonus, I didn't flinch. I didn't twist the truth or make it smaller to protect someone else. I just smiled and said, I helped someone I cared about do something they really wanted. And I left it there because the act was mine. The intention was mine. The outcome didn't have to define me anymore. I wasn't telling the story from a place of regret. I was telling it from a place of growth. That weekend, I walked to the farmer's market and bought the kind of fruit I used to avoid because it felt too expensive. I filled my basket slowly, intentionally. No guilt, just color, just choice. I stopped by a small flower stand and picked out a single sunflower, bright, upright, unapologetic. I placed it in a jar by the kitchen window when I got home, and it turned slightly toward the light, like it knew something I didn't. I brewed tea, played music, didn't check my phone. I was no longer performing healing, I was living it. I lit a candle and sat down to write, not about her, not about the past, but about what comes next. I wrote, this chapter won't begin with what I gave, it'll begin with what I kept. And I underlined it twice, because what I had kept was myself. Wiser, softer, clearer, no longer a background character in someone else's dream. I closed the notebook and took a long sip of tea, letting the warmth settle deep. This was the kind of peace no apology could buy. This was what it felt like to no longer need to be remembered because you are already home in your own memory. And this time it includes you. A few days later, her name appeared in my notifications. A photo of a new city, a new dress, a new caption, still floating from the best trip ever. Grateful for everyone who believed in me. Vague enough to mean nothing. Broad enough to include everyone, but truly thank no one. I didn't open it. I didn't check the likes. I just let the screen dim on its own. Because I had stopped confusing attention with affection, and I had stopped giving weight. 2 words that only arrived after the applause. I stepped outside for a walk, no destination, just movement. The air was soft, the sky open. I passed a family laughing on a porch, a child chasing wind with a kite. The world was moving forward, as it always does, and so was I. I stopped by a park bench and sat down, letting the quiet settle around me like a familiar coat. I took out my journal and flipped to the last page. Wrote, She went on vacation. I came home to myself. And that truth, quiet and complete, felt like enough. Not a punchline, not a lesson. Just a full circle I had drawn with my own hand. I no longer needed her to say thank you, because I had finally thanked myself for staying, for waking up, for walking away without making a scene. There is a certain kind of strength in not retaliating, in not explaining, in simply living a life so rooted, no one else's absence shakes your foundation. I looked at the trees above me, the light cutting through the branches, and smiled. Some people take trips to find peace, others just stop waiting to be invited and build it slowly where they already are. That night, I did something small that felt big. I printed one of the photos I took on my solo trip. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet corner of a cafe, my half-empty cup of tea, sunlight catching the rim. But it was mine. I slipped it into a frame and placed it on my shelf, between the books I now had time to read. Not to showcase, not to perform, just to remind myself, presence doesn't need permission. I didn't post it, I didn't text her, I didn't wait for another message that wouldn't come. I simply lit a candle, sat down at my kitchen table, and whispered, "This is what being remembered by yourself looks like." The flame flickered gently, and for once I didn't need it to mean anything more. I was here, I was whole. I was not a story someone else forgot to tell. I was the author now. I walked to the mirror before bed and looked at my own reflection. For so long I had measured my worth by how many times I showed up for others. But tonight, I saw a different woman. Not the giver, not the fixer, just someone soft and solid. Someone who no longer disappears in the background of someone else's joy. I touched the glass and smiled, not because I had won anything, but because I had stopped losing myself. And as I turned off the light, I didn't feel emptiness. I felt space, room, breath. And in that gentle, golden dark, I finally understood. You don't need to be tagged to belong. You don't need to be mentioned to matter. You don't need to be seen to exist, because the most permanent kind of presence is the one you give yourself.